Great.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar reviewing the 2018 Farm Bill and its impact on agricultural land values, presented by Dr. John Newton. My name is Amanda Maroney, and I'm the Education Manager for the Realtors Land Institute, and I'll be your host today. The Realtors Land Institute, the voice of land, continually strives to maintain its status as the acknowledged leader for all matters pertaining to the land real estate profession. RLI endeavors to remain the essential membership organization for the extraordinary real estate professionals who broker, lease, sell, develop, and manage our most precious resource, the land. We're here to provide our members the expertise, camaraderie, and resources that are the foundation for all land real estate professionals to become the best in the business. While this webinar does not count as credit towards RLI's elite accredited land consultant ALC designation, it is filled with valuable expertise. During today's presentation, we would love to hear from you and encourage questions. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, and the chat function is located on the bottom of the Zoom screen. And at the end of the session, after Dr. Newton's done with his presentation, we will leave time open for Q&A, and this is where we will be able to answer those questions. And so I am pleased to introduce Dr. John Newton as our presenter today. Dr. Newton is the Chief Economist for American Farm Bureau Federation, the largest farm organization of independent farmers in the United States. In this role, Dr. Newton provides an analysis used for the development of and advocacy for Farm Bureau policy. For those of you who are just joining, welcome to today's session reviewing the 2018 Farm Bill and its impact on agricultural land values, presented by Dr. John Newton. John, thank you again so much today for presenting, and I'm going to turn it over to you. But once again, I just want to mention, please hold your questions until the end of today's session. And also, if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to type them into the chat function. And once I turn it over to John, I'm going to actually go ahead and put everybody on mute so we're not distracted by any type of background noise. So thank you again for all attending, and I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, great. Well, thanks for the opportunity to join you all again. I had a good time out in New Mexico earlier this year visiting with you all. I'm going to go through just some high-level provisions of the 2018 Farm Bill. It's a big bill, so there's a lot of things that we may not cover in this presentation, but feel free if you have any questions at the end on a particular issue to ask that, and I'll provide the best answer I can to you or get back to you at a later date. What we know, we worked on the Farm Bill, American Farm Bureau Federation. We put together a Farm Bill working group about 3 years ago of our grassroots members with the goal of going out to figure out what was working and what wasn't working on the 2018 Farm Bill. And that so happened to line up really well with when the Farm Bill was being taken up by the committees. So a lot of the stuff that's in this Farm Bill are things that our members surfaced very early on and wanted to see addressed this bill. So our members were particularly happy when President Trump signed the Farm Bill in December in 2018. It's noteworthy that this Farm Bill was the first time that a Farm Bill was done in the same year that it expired since 1993. So there's an old saying in Washington, D.C. is that you don't start a farm bill until the other one expired. The 14th Farm Bill expired in September 2018, and working with the House and Senate Ag Committee, we were able to get it across the finish line before the end of last year. What's in the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is a 5-year piece of legislation. The Congressional Budget Office scores the Farm Bill over a 10-year period. And over this 10-year period, the 2018 Farm Bill is projected to spend about $867 billion. The largest piece of the Farm Bill is the nutrition title, $664 billion in projected outlays, about 76% of the Farm Bill. The nutrition title was a hotly debated area in both the House and Senate that delayed the Farm Bill's ultimate passage. But it's because it's such a big component of the bill that it was important to get the nutrition title right and address the concerns folks had with the nutrition assistance programs and able-bodied working adults, et cetera. The other 24% of the Farm Bill are things that we at Farm Bureau paid particularly close attention to, and that's crop insurance, the commodity title, that's your Title I programs like your ARC and PLC, and the conservation titles, things like your CRP program, your EQIP program, your CSP program. Those three titles of the Farm Bill represent the large majority of the remaining 24% of Farm Bill spending. Just real quickly, we can see that the Farm Bill was pretty bipartisan in the Senate. We had 87% of the senators support the Farm Bill. That's the highest level of passage of a Farm Bill of all time, I believe. So strong bipartisan support coming out of the Senate. In the House, we had, again, pretty strong support. The Farm Bill failed in the House the first time around, but once they were able to, the Farm Bill in the House the first time around passed on a one-vote majority from party line. All Republicans voted for the Farm Bill originally. When it passed in December of 18, we had 182 Republicans and 187 Democrats voted for the bill. So it was pretty bipartisan coming out of the House as well. Now, when we look at what the Farm Bill did, just high level, some of the real important things that we wanted to see in this Farm Bill, we wanted to protect crop insurance. And what we've seen, looks like somebody's not on mute there. Is there a way to fix that?
I've done that before. I think it was the second day here. I did something and then...
Hello?
So sorry. No, it's okay.
All right. Here we go. One of the things that we wanted to do this Farm Bill is make sure that we protected the crop insurance program so that it didn't have any reductions in benefits or a cap on subsidies, things of that nature. Those would have been what we call poison pill amendments to the Farm Bill and would have jeopardized the ability to get the bill through both the House and Senate. And what we've seen is since major crop insurance reform in the early 2000s, the need for ad hoc disaster payments had dropped significantly. You could see that in the late 90s, early 2000s, over a 4-year period, we made over $30 billion in ad hoc disaster payments to farmers. But once the crop insurance really expanded, it expanded in the number of acres enrolled and the number of crops covered, the need for those ad hoc disaster payments declined substantially. And I think that's notwithstanding the last few years where we've had pretty devastating flooding and hurricanes and trade situations as well that's resulted in some ad hoc disaster payments to farmers. But this is really a testament to the success of the crop insurance program. And so what we saw in this Farm Bill, crop insurance was protected. There were no major cuts to the crop insurance program. There were a few things done administratively to crop insurance, but there were no major cuts to benefits, cuts to eligibility. We didn't get rid of the harvest price option, anything of that nature. And so that was a real big win. And you can see here in the map, you can see just the adoption of revenue-based crop insurance policies, throughout the Corn Belt up into the Dakotas. In some of these counties, more than 200,000 acres are covered in crop insurance every single year. If you look then at what we saw in the Title I programs, that's going to be your agricultural risk coverage and your price loss coverage. It's important to note that the 2014 Farm Bill was pretty revolutionary in that it got rid of direct payment programs and replaced them with more need-based programs, agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage. PLC is a target price support program, and what that does is it provides a payment to eligible growers whenever the marketing year average crop price falls below a reference price. So for example, The reference price for corn was set in the 2014 Farm Bill at $3.70 per bushel. If we saw a corn price of $3.30 per bushel, that would result in a 40-cent per bushel payment under the PLC program. The ARC program is a county-based program that uses Olympic moving average prices and county average yields to protect revenue at the farm level. And under ARC County, a payment's made if the actual revenue in a particular year falls below 86% of the revenue guarantee based on the Olympic moving average. Both of those programs that were put in place in the 14th Farm Bill were maintained and improved in the 2018 Farm Bill. Under PLC, the target price support level was made to be more flexible, such that if we see higher commodity prices in nearby years, that could raise the support level under PLC. And I'll explain how that price support elevator works in the next slide. Under ARC County, a lot of the provisions were more in the weeds type of changes. We saw the transitional yields were adjusted, but I think the biggest thing on ARC County that really addressed a lot of concerns from growers was that no longer would they use the FSA county average yields. They would rely on the crop insurance RMA yields in determining whether or not ARC would trigger a program payment. So the enhancement to ARC was more in the weeds. And then I think one of the other really big enhancements that we saw this Farm Bill is in 2014, growers had to pick whether they wanted to be in ARC County or PLC, and that was to be in place for the 5-year life of the 14th Farm Bill. So if you picked ARC County on your corn base acres in 2014, that's the program that you had until this most recent program expired. What we saw in this Farm Bill is that growers can now choose in 2019 ARC or PLC, and then again in 2021 they'll get a chance to change their decision every single year for the last 3 years of the Farm Bill. And that provides an opportunity for farmers to choose the risk management program that works best for their operation. Now, farm programs are based on historical plantings, base acres, so to speak, and so this Farm Bill doesn't give anyone an opportunity to update or reallocate their base acres across commodities. So the commodity base will mostly stay the same. And so, for example, I think we have somewhere around 95 to 100 million base acres of corn, about 50 million base acres of soybeans, and about 50 million base acres of wheat. So those are the base acres that are eligible for program payments under ARC or PLC. I think finally, one of the other things that we saw in the 18 Farm Bill is that marketing loan rates were increased. So the marketing loan rate for corn, for example, had been $1.95, and it was raised to $2.20 per bushel. Similar marketing loan rates adjustments were made for a variety of other commodities as well. Now, this can be somewhat technical to understand how the price loss coverage elevator works, but essentially it's limited to, it can increase to as much as 115% of the reference price in the Farm Bill. So the steps that we go through in order to determine if a PLC support price is higher or is lifted or escalated, you first start with what's the highest number, the reference price or 85% of the 5-year Olympic moving average. If it's the reference price, then you use the reference price as a support level under PLC. If 85% of the Olympic moving average is higher than the statutory reference price, then you use a value between 115% of the reference price and 85% of the Olympic moving average price. So it creates a range, so to speak, of potential support prices that go from the support price listed in the 14th Farm Bill all the way up to 115% of that reference price. So the idea being that if we see higher prices in the future, that could mean the support level for those commodities would also increase. So this table shows the current reference prices in the Farm Bill, as well as the maximum reference prices that this program would allow commodity prices to move to, support levels to move to. So currently corn is $3.70. The maximum reference price that we could ever get for corn is $4.26 per bushel. For soybeans, it's $8.40. The maximum is 966, and these numbers are all 115% of the current reference price. So you can see where all the commodities in a high price environment could see their support levels lifted, and that's really important going into beginning the negotiations for the 2023 Farm Bill. Is the potential for these programs to provide a little bit more benefits down the line. If we look at what Congressional Budget Office projects participation in these programs to be, the expectation is, and again, growers have the opportunity to choose between ARC and PLC later this fall. And the thought process is that a majority of farmers are going to enroll in the price loss coverage program as opposed to the ARC County program. Many of the southern commodities were already enrolled in PLC. For example, peanuts, rice, wheat was about 50-50 enrollment in ARC and PLC. So the expectation is that corn and soybeans will move more heavily into the PLC program. I think that remains to be seen, given what we're currently experiencing on the delayed plantings and the price impact that it's having in corn markets. That could potentially lead to growers thinking or reconsidering ARC or PLC. But for Congressional Budget Office perspectives, these Title I programs over the next decade are projected to spend about $6 billion a year. A majority of those program payments are going to be in the price loss coverage program, and the ARC County program is expected to diminish in benefits going out over the next decade. You see there the light blue, that's going to be your dairy safety net, and you can see the projected payments to dairy farmers. It's rather small, smaller than what you see under ARC and PLC, but it's a notable improvement over what they had in the 14th Farm Bill, and we'll talk a little bit about how dairy is the big winner of this Farm Bill in a few slides. If you look at Congressional Budget Office projections, just breaking it down, total program payments by crop, corn's projected to receive about 40% of the program payments over the next decade. Again, that's a reflection of the corn base acres that we have here in the U.S. Wheat, the second biggest beneficiary at 8.6 billion, rice 7.6, peanuts 4.6 billion, and then the other commodities such as soybeans, cotton, milk, barley, other minor oil seeds at about $16 billion. So again, the breakdown shows the payments for corn expect to be the highest at $22 billion. But I mentioned earlier, in order to qualify for one of these program payments, it's based on the historical base acres. So what we see the base acre breakdown, 84% of the base acres are in corn, wheat, and soybeans. We have about 250 million base acres in the U.S. Corn, 95 million base acres, 37% of all base acres. Wheat, 63 million base acres. Soybeans, 53 million base acres. And then you can see the breakdown for the other crops. And it's important to think about this. We've got 94 million base acres of corn. Last year, we planted 89 million acres. This year, it's a stretch to think that we'll get to 92 million acres of corn. So we have more corn base acres than what we have corn planted area. Wheat, we're planting about 47 million acres of wheat, but we've got more base acres than what we plant. But then on the soybean side, we planted 90 million acres of soybeans last year, just about. This year, we're projected to plant 85. Again, we're going to struggle to reach that due to the wet conditions and delayed plantings that are currently happening across the country. But we have 54 million base acres of soybeans, yet we plant about 40 million acres more than that each year. So that shows you how the farm program payments are decoupled from actual planting decisions. And that's real important for Farm Bill and for WTO, World Trade Organization issues. Here's another way to look at those base acres. You can see everywhere in the red, all of those crops have more base acres than what we plant. And then all the blue areas is where we have fewer base acres than what we plant. And in total, there are about 12 million more base acres than what we plant of covered commodities on average. So we have about 270 million acres of base. And of these commodities, we have about 261 million acres planted on average. what this farm bill does do, and we haven't yet seen the implementation rules for a lot of these things. I think that's what a lot of folks in industry are waiting to see is when the regs come down from USDA. But there is a provision in this farm bill to update base acres if the farm did not have it in some sort of production or grass. So if over the last decade a farm, let's say, had oat base acres but has since moved into cattle or something along those lines, then that farm, those base acres would be what's called suspended base. So they would no longer be eligible for an ARC or PLC benefit, but because they're suspended, they'll be eligible for an $18 per base acre payment for conservation or grassland initiatives. So again, there's several million acres across the country that could potentially be classified as suspended base. I think we don't know the number yet until we see those implementation rules from Farm Service Agency. One of the other big things that we saw this farm bill, and this was a big win, again, like protecting crop insurance, we were able to prevent any adjustments to the AGI limitations. So the AGI, adjusted gross income, the eligibility was maintained at $900,000 in AGI. So anybody with an AGI above that level would not be able to qualify for Title I farm programs. The payment limitations remain at $125,000 per operator, but what we saw was actively engaged definition was expanded to include first cousins, nieces, and nephews, and that's really designed to reflect the diversity in farm operations and farm management that we see today. So more farm operators that are making a meaningful contribution to the farm are able to qualify to receive some of those farm program payments, and I think that's real important given where we are in the farm economy. I mentioned that dairy was the big winner this farm bill. In our farm bill working group efforts that were underway, over 3 years ago, we heard from a lot of our dairy farmers they weren't happy with the safety net that they had. And the dairy safety net prior to the 14 farm bill was based on milk prices. In 2014, it was switched to be based on a margin, meaning it was based on the difference between the milk price and the cost of feeding a dairy animal. So under the margin program, if the difference between the milk price and the feed cost fell below $8 per hundredweight in the prior farm bill, dairy farmers would be eligible for a program payment. And what happened in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, you can see only a few times did the margin fall below that $8 per hundredweight coverage level. So dairy farmers ultimately paid about $73 million in premiums into the MPP program and received about $12 million back. So there was a significant need to revamp the dairy safety net. Matter of fact, the previous dairy safety net left such a bad taste in dairy farmers' mouth that Congress renamed the program. They changed it from the Margin Protection Program to the new Dairy Margin Coverage Program. And in a nutshell, what they did was they raised the maximum coverage level from $8 to $9.50 per hundredweight and made it much more affordable for farmers to cover the first 5 million pounds of milk in the program. So as you can see here, under the new $9.50 cap, the dairy safety net would have triggered 80% of the months and would have provided an average return back to the dairy farmer of over $1 per hundredweight. So what we see in the previous farm bill under the MPP coverage of $8 per hundredweight, farmers had to pay a premium. Their average net benefit was a loss of 15 cents. That wasn't much of a safety net when you consider that milk prices fell by 50% since this farm bill was passed in 2014. So the new farm bill with coverage up to $9.50 would have provided significantly more program payments to dairy farmers to the extent that the average payment would have been about $80,000 a year to dairy farmers covering 5 million pounds of milk. One of the other big things that probably our phone is ringing off the hook after the farm bill was passed was it took industrial hemp off the Schedule I list of narcotics. So industrial hemp is now legal to grow in the United States. It's going to be eligible for crop insurance at some point in the near future. I think this is one of the rules of implementation rules that folks are most looking forward to seeing from the department, because there's a lot of interest on the legalization of industrial hemp. The market, the value of industrial hemp through CBD oil, as well as in the fibers, is something that a lot of growers are considering. So this farm bill legalized it, but there's still some state hurdles, regulatory hurdles that need to be cleared with respect to industrial hemp. But I could say it's one of the most talked about items from this farm bill is the fact that that's now legal. Shifting gears a little bit to the other title that really has an impact on land values across the country, and that's the conservation title. One of the things that we saw in this farm bill is the CRP program was capped at 24 million acres under the last farm bill. The CRP expands from 24 million acres all the way to 27 million acres by 2023. And so we see that the opportunity to enroll in both continuous or general sign-up under the CRP program will expand in the years to come. There is a component of the Farm Bill that says that some of that has to remain in grassland. I think one of the biggest things that our members surfaced with respect to the CRP program was that the rental rates and incentive payments under CRP in some cases were so high that it was difficult for farmers to get access to productive cropland. And so what this farm bill did, and you can see where these rental rates are, as high as nearly $300 an acre in parts of Illinois and Iowa, is this farm bill put a cap on rental rates. The cap on rental rates expected to be 85% of the average county rental rate for general CRP and 90% of the county rental rate on continuous CRP. We've got to see what the rules are from the department on this, how frequently they update those county rental rates. But this is really aligned with Farm Bureau policy. We're excited to see these rental rates be a little bit more market-oriented and market-based, so that farmers, and especially young farmers, have an opportunity to get access to really high productive cropland. And that's something that we expect this Farm Bill to do on CRP. There were a number of enhancements that were also made to the EQIP and CSP programs in terms of spending. More practices are covered, specifically on the EQIP program. The carve out for livestock based practices was reduced from 60% to, I believe, 55%, 50 or 55%, and then the wildlife habitat initiatives were expanded from 5% to, I think, 10%. So you still have a pretty large pot of money for financial and technical assistance under the EQIP program. The CSP program was also improved upon in those nearby years. We have a very good article on our website at fb.org/marketintel reviewing the changes made to the conservation title as well as the EQIP and CSP programs. I think one of the things that when we're looking at the conservation title, and you go back really to the 14 Farm Bill, the conservation title of the Farm Bill is agriculture's Green New Deal. We've got about 140 million acres across the country that are enrolled in some sort of federal conservation program. That's about 15% of farmland in the U.S. in these conservation programs. Moreover, that doesn't include any state-led initiatives or voluntary initiatives that farmers and ranchers are doing. So the conservation components of this Farm Bill, the funding for these conservation practices was improved upon. So farmers and ranchers will continue to have access to the financial and technical assistance in those categories. With that, I think a lot of the information that we covered today, and probably even more detail on some of the provisions with respect to the Dairy Safety Net or ARC or PLC or the conservation programs. If you go to fb.org/marketintel and search Farm Bill, you'll find a variety of articles on our website that provide a more in-depth analysis of some of the changes that were made in the 2018 Farm Bill. With that, I'd welcome the opportunity to take questions from the audience.
As John mentioned, we are now in our Q&A portion of today's webinar. So if anybody is interested in asking John any questions, please do so now. You can either type it into the chat box, which is located on your screen, or you can also just chat out loud. I can unmute you all, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask away.
All right, I see some questions in the chat. No?
Oh, we did have one person, I'm sorry, John, we did have one person type in asking about the slides. I will be providing you all with a copy of John's presentation slides. I'll be sending a follow-up email that will provide you access to those slides, along with today's recording of the webinar. And once again, if anybody has any questions, we're opening up the floor. So please feel free to either chat over the phone or type in your questions over the chat bubble.
John, is it accurate that you can update your yields but not your base acres?
That's right. There is a component in this farm bill, and it wasn't included in the slides, but it is in our analysis online that allows you to update your PLC program yield. So you'll have two different 4 or 5 year periods to update your program yields, and so you can either update or not update. I would anticipate folks will only update if it results in a higher program yield.
Right. Thank you.
Dan, we have another question that came over chat. They said, thoughts on grain stocks moving forward in light of weather delays?
That's a fantastic question. I think that's, we're historically behind in our pace of planting currently. We've still got to put 100 million acres of corn and soybeans in the ground. For many folks, their planting windows are already closed or is closing pretty quickly. So I think what we're for sure going to see is a higher level of prevent plant this year. So if we were to see an extra 2 or 3 million acres come out of corn, we also think about the yield drag that we're going to see on corn this year due to A, late planting, B, the ground that is planted has some pretty poor growing conditions so far. So I think we're very likely to see the corn stocks number come down from where USDA has it currently at about 2.5 billion bushels. So I think that's going to come down for sure, and I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen corn prices really skyrocket the last 2 weeks. On the soybean side, the uncertainty around trade is weighing heavy on that market. We've got pretty significant planting delays in soybeans, yet the price is just barely above the a 2.1, 2.2 soybean to corn price ratio at $9 a bushel, and that's because with China out of the market, our inventories on soybeans are going to be pretty burdensome, and it could take years to work through those stockpiles.
Dan, there's another question that we had from one of our members. Do you anticipate a loss of farmers due to the severity of this year's flooding causing an increase in farms for sale?
That's a fantastic question, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that net farm income in the last few years has been severely depressed. I think we've talked to a lot of our members who are, they know that ag is cyclical. They know that prices are going to recover, but don't want to burn through their equity waiting for prices to get better. So, they may elect to, maybe not sell the ground right now. Maybe they don't farm it and they rent it out to somebody else. But I think there's a lot of conversations around the country on that very issue. Anecdotally, I've heard that farms for sale have increased or doubled across portions of the Midwest, but I don't have any data, hard data to support that.
Can you use crop insurance yield data to update your PLC yield?
That's a great question. I think what folks are going to need to do is go to their FSA office and see what their farm PLC yields will be, and work with their county FSA folks to make that update calculation. I don't know what relationship your crop insurance and your FSA yields are gonna differ, but I think that may be something that's done on an individual relationship style level.
We have another question. What are your projections for net farm income in 2019 and 2020, considering current corn and soybean markets?
I know that USDA in March updated their projections and said that we'd see a bump in farm income, about 10% in 2019 to $69 billion. But a lot of things have changed since that point in time. I think one of the biggest is what we've seen on African swine fever and the increase in lean hog prices. That's certainly something that's going to change the dynamic of farm income. And then the late planting that's happening right now. Those that have corn to sell this year, old crop or new crop, are going to be able to sell it at a higher price. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty. Add into the fact that we're going to get a disaster package through the House soon, and then we've got another round of trade aid. So we're sitting at that $69 billion. It likely can be higher than that due to those government payments, as well as the changing supply and demand conditions.
John, as for another question, if you have base acreage, which aren't part of your planted acres, will you receive payment on these base acres? Example, have a wheat base but don't plant wheat.
Well, if you continue to plant something, if you have wheat base but you're planting corn, soybeans, or another covered commodity, you don't lose that wheat base. But if that wheat base is now in livestock production, or maybe it's in aquaculture, who knows? But if it's in something other than a planted commodity, you could potentially have that wheat base turn into what's called suspended base, and the suspended base will be eligible for an $18 an acre payment. I think what's important there is that suspended base doesn't mean it's gone. So next farm bill, Congress could do something to make it unsuspended if the budget's there.
Hey, so do you know what, my clients are coming tomorrow to look at the property, so do you know what they're gonna do about that piece yet?
About what piece?
Remember I told you this morning about the piece that's like, looks like it's full of water?
I don't know. Yeah, I to look at it. I haven't heard anything.
Sorry about that. I think that might have been some background conversation.
I see a question here on industrial hemp.
Yes, that just popped up. We have a member asking, please elaborate on industrial hemp and the Farm Bill.
I'll tell you what, on the industrial hemp, there's so much uncertainty on industrial hemp and the provisions that the best resource I can give you is, I'm going to put it in the chat box, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll post a link. There's a link to an article that should provide it's a pretty thorough and deep dive into all the provisions on industrial hemp.
John, we received a comment. I think it's a continuation on the previous question in regards to base acres. The comment is, so you won't receive a payment on all base acres, only the planted acres. So in reality, you could have 300 acres of corn base, but actually plant 500 acres annually. Payment will be made on the 300 acres of corn base.
I think that question's, you won't receive a payment on all planted acres. So what you have is if, let's say you plant 500 acres of corn, but have 300 base, you'll get paid on the 300 base. You won't get a program payment on the other acres that aren't base. And I think that's real important for land values when folks are looking at a piece of ground, to know what the base acres are on the farmland, know what the PLC program yields are, because that should impact the land value.
Do we have any other questions? If so, please feel free to either type in over the chat function, or also feel free to just chat out loud as well. If we don't have any more questions for today, I think we're going to close up the end of this today's webinar, unless you have any additional comments, John.
No, I think this is great.
No? Okay, great. So thank you. I want to thank you again, John, for taking the time and presenting today on the Farm Bill. We really do appreciate it. And as John has up on the screen, if you have any other additional questions in regards to his the content of his webinar today, please feel free to reach out to him. And also, I just want to mention again, a recording of this webinar will be made available to you all electronically in the next couple of days. I'll be sending you all a follow-up email with access to that recording, as well as a copy of John's slides. So once again, thank you all for attending today's webinar. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you again, John, for your time.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you.